Flat Earth Family Affairs. I consider this the Garriott Connection of our research. I've been doing a lot of different types of research into different types of connections, from Disney to Peter DeManki's Singularity University and such. And one that caught my interest was Richard Garriott. I actually been following this man's career in the video game industry, and only through Flat Earth have I looked closer to see that he has deeper connections with space, Singularity University, his Illuminati connections. You'll see it all here, and his father with Skylab, which is clearly fake, but I'll let you decide. So enjoy.
Launching Skylab into orbit won't demand the rocket power that sent men to the moon. NASA converts the top of a Saturn V into the first American space station.
It's been compared to the size of a small 3-bedroom house. Each had our own bedroom. Each bedroom was about the size of a telephone booth, and the beds were fastened to the wall.
The commander of Skylab's first crew is Pete Conrad, who flew 2 Gemini missions and Apollo 12. Rookie Paul Weitz is the pilot. And another rookie, Joseph Kerwin, is the science pilot. Skylab and crew will launch on separate rockets. Not since Gemini 6 and 7 has NASA attempted 2 launches so close together. The unmanned Skylab flies first.
The Skylab lifting off the pad now, moving up. Skylab has cleared the tower.
Looked like a great launch. Pretty soon, the news from Mission Control began to get bad. There had been a G-shock and a sudden acceleration on the way up. They didn't know what caused it.
Skylab space station now in orbit. Still some doubt in the minds of flight controllers here in Mission Control as to whether the main solar panels on the workshop have indeed deployed.
One of them didn't respond at all. The other one, just a trickle of current that they could see.
The planned 28-day mission is not possible without the workshop main solar panels.
Meanwhile, the temperatures, both outside and inside of the workshop, began to rise. We have insufficient electrical power, we have temperatures that are out of control. It looks like the heat shield is gone.
Skylab's biggest problem is heat from the sun. Engineers quickly design a giant parasol. After a 10-day delay, Kerwin, Conrad, and Weitz finally launch, NASA's first repairman in space.
T-minus 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Engine sequence start. 2, 1, 0. We have launch commit and we have liftoff. The clock is running and Skylab has cleared the tower.
Houston, Skylab.
8 hours after launch, they rendezvous with Skylab and see the damage close up.
Houston is now controlling. Roger, copy.
In brief description, it is suspected solar wing is gone.
The crew has to enter Skylab to repair it,
Completely off the bird.
270 miles above the Earth,
Is in fact partially
traveling at more than 17,000 miles an hour.
That's the metric.
Pete Conrad must perform a precise hard dock.
You got a hard dock out of it.
Hey, way to go.
but sure, and everything so far is working.
It didn't smell very good. It had a sort of a burned smell to it.
The crew gets to work in Skylab's searing heat. The astronauts take turns trying to deploy the parasol.
Okay, Houston, we had a clean deployment as far as the rods clearing and everything. Right at the moment,
And then a spring was released and the fishing rods pulled up.
oscillated the rod in and out stroke-wise rapidly.
It was successful and the temperatures began to come down. They came down from the 130s to the mid-80s.
But Skylab has an even bigger problem. One solar panel had been damaged during launch and still isn't working. A backup team works with a full-size model of Skylab in a neutral buoyancy tank. Their solution is unprecedented in manned spaceflight.
For the first time, crews going outside in their spacesuits to repair problems that had never been done before.
Okay, Houston, we're out there. We have the debris in sight.
The other solar panel is jammed by a small piece of metal, preventing it from opening. If they can cut it, the panel should unfold.
There looks like enough room to get the cutter, and I'm trying to help Joe stabilize. Just take it easy. So that's it, you got it right there.
I pulled on the close the jaws rope
Pull back.
and completed cutting the aluminum scrap. We did it. The best sight of the entire mission. That solar panel cover all the way up at 90 degrees. And the people on the ground were so pleased too, because we were going to get our power back. We were going to be able to complete the mission. That was a good day. That was a very good day.
The space station is open for business. Over the next 8 months, Skylab is home to 3 crews, each setting new records for astronauts living and working in space.
The feeling of being Peter Pan, of being your own spacecraft flying around the Earth, is awesome and incredible. We were zipping around there as if we had never been other than weightless.
Skylab crews log more than 3,000 hours of scientific experiments and transform our understanding of the sun. Skylab is the first step toward the human habitation of space. Jerry Carr, William Pogue, and Edward Gibson are Skylab's last crew.
We demonstrated that you could go 3 months in space and come back in good shape. That was a triumph.
The technology of the Apollo program not only carries astronauts to the moon and back, but allows humans to live and work in space longer than ever before.
British Airways say they may delay their flights as America's Skylab space station falls to Earth in the next 36 hours. Some countries say they'll stop all their flights as Skylab comes down, but the chances of it hitting anyone are said to be very remote. Tonight's check on the 85 tons of Skylab shows that the Space Lab's less than 120 miles up and will fall out of the sky late tomorrow or early on Wednesday. Skylab's next close approach to Britain will be at 11:30 tomorrow morning. It'll cross the Scillies and Guernsey. Our science editor Peter Fairley assesses the chances of anyone being hit by Skylab.
If anyone sold you a hat to stop bits of Skylab falling on your head, and several thousand have been sold in America, you've probably wasted your money. The team of British scientists who've been tracking Skylab for ITN now predict it won't fall on Britain. There were fears that it might hit Cornwall, but its orbit now is taking it further south. But it will fall somewhere, because what goes up must come down. And according to the North American Air Defense Command, who are using computers to plot its descent second by second, 90% of the world's population, that's 4 billion people, are theoretically at risk. The dying moments of Skylab are expected to occur somewhere along a line 50 degrees either side of the equator. The 85-ton spaceship, the biggest thing ever put into space, will begin to disintegrate as it hits really thick air layers. The friction will build up until the whole thing has turned into a fireball. Two questions remain. What bits will reach the ground and survive re-entry, and will they hit anyone or anything? NASA tonight put the odds at 152 to 1 against, but nevertheless they've got lawyers standing by in case of mishaps and court claims. There are 8 bits which may reach the ground, 6 oxygen tanks weighing more than a ton each and made of titanium, 1 lead-lined film vault weighing nearly 2 tons, and the biggest piece of all, the fixed airlock shroud, 22 feet long, made of aluminium and weighing 2¼ tons. All these are likely to hit the Earth at 260 miles an hour. So what are the chances of it hitting land? Well, NASA has one card up its sleeve. The small maneuvering engines aboard Skylab still have some fuel left in them, and in the final stages, if computers predict that the debris seems destined to land on populated regions, scientists at Houston will try to fire the whole lot together and push Skylab into an ocean. We won't know until the last 2 hours. Skylab was launched in 1973 to explore the problems of men living for long periods in space. It was occupied by 3 crews, 9 men in all, the longest living aboard for 86 days, then a record which the Russians have subsequently beaten. The Americans hoped it would never come down at all. They planned to keep on raising it in orbit using the space shuttle as a kind of pushing vehicle, but they miscalculated. During the last 3 years, the sun has been unusually active, and the solar wind, which the sun puffs out, has forced Skylab down faster than gravity would normally do. And the shuttle, on which so much depended, has not even made its maiden flight yet. So there's an awful lot of tension and nail-biting going on in American space headquarters at this moment.
The landing space station, Skylab, still has the experts guessing just when and where it'll fall to Earth. Their latest reckoning is it'll come down at 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, somewhere over the South Atlantic, west of Africa. But they told us tonight we could be 5 hours out either way. What can be said for certain is that the 85 tons of Skylab will pass over Cornwall, right over the Lizard Head, at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. If it were coming down at that time, and we stress that's pretty unlikely, debris could theoretically be strewn over the entire shaded area of this map. But the American Space Agency say they're reasonably confident that if Skylab looks like heading for land, they'll fire its engines to delay the fall until it's safely over water. One spacecraft giving them no trouble is Voyager 2, sending back detailed pictures of Jupiter and 4 of its moons. These include Europa, the size of our own moon, never photographed in detail before. It's an ice-covered place, flat, with a lot of cracks. As Voyager 2 passed close to Jupiter itself, the turbulence around the mysterious big red spot, seen by Voyager 1 4 months ago, has subsided. But there's no doubt it's a storm going on down there, covering an area 3 times the size of the Earth. Voyager has now left Jupiter on its way to Saturn.
Good evening. The remains of Skylab crashed to Earth at about 5:30 this evening, and a sizable proportion of them landed in Australia. The 77-ton space laboratory flew further than the Americans had hoped, and tonight it began breaking up over Western Australia, the end of its 6-year voyage through space. Skylab overshot the favored landing place, the Indian Ocean. Throughout the afternoon, the Americans predicted it would fall into the sea, but from 5:30 our time, reports began to come in that pieces had been seen passing over at least 4 Australian towns. And as time went on, it seemed likely that much of the wreckage had fallen into the Australian desert 500 miles further on. Tonight, 2 West Australian eyewitnesses described to Gavin Hewitt what they'd seen as the Skylab wreckage passed over.
As it went through the air, I saw a main body of trailing fire, which was trailing fire behind it. There was a main center which was glowing red and green flames.
and fairly large pieces departing away from it all start burning up.
How large did these pieces look?
Oh, that'd be fairly hard to estimate. I would say the distance from where I saw it would be at least 200 miles away, so I cannot give any estimates on the size.
What actually happened was after it had passed about 3 or 4 minutes later, we got a series of like sonic booms over the town, which was rather impressive. I think that was the eeriest part of the whole thing. The lights were rather spectacular, but the booms that followed, I suppose, were a little bit scary and eerie.
Throughout the last few days, as Skylab's orbit dropped, America's National Aeronautics and Space Administration kept a minute-by-minute check on the space station. Our Washington correspondent, Martin Bell, shared NASA's round-the-clock watch.
The space agency in its control center here was ready to alert foreign governments, send out disaster relief teams, whatever was necessary. And in a tense and crowded NASA headquarters, as the moment of Skylab's re-entry approached, there was no knowing what would be necessary. No knowing either exactly when or where the spacecraft would re-enter. NASA's predictions had Skylab falling on a 4,000-mile path, first across the Atlantic and then the South Indian Ocean. It was last tracked breaking up over Ascension Island, and from then on its 500 pieces should have splashed down safely at sea. But they didn't, leaving Skylab controller Richard Smith to answer questions like why were the predictions out, and was he at least surprised?
Yes, because I thought it was going to break up a little earlier than that, and probably would not reach Australia. It apparently flew longer than we expected, broke up at a slightly lower altitude, and we were surprised when we heard that there were sightings of Australia, because our last prediction that NOAA had made said it should have come down slightly before reaching Australia, and we were surprised when we got that input.
Why do you think it took longer to break up than you expected?
A lot of variables in the upper atmosphere and a lot of variations in the vehicle strength. The fact that if it breaks up at a lower altitude could very easily mean that the heat spike could have been greater, could have very probably indicate less pieces, less mass coming down, and would have also meant a smaller footprint if it came and broke up at lower altitude.
Are you satisfied? Can you be satisfied with the way this thing has ended?
I won't be satisfied until I wait 2 or 3 days and there's no report of any damage or injury anywhere. Then I would be satisfied.
We take it there'll be no more Skylabs or spacecraft making random re-entries after this?
There will be spacecraft making random entries after this. There's a lot flying today that will random re-enter. I question that a large manned spacecraft such as this would be built in this fashion today, because we would not build it this way because of the techniques are different.
And NASA's message to the people of Australia?
Well, if you saw it, I hope the sight was spectacular, and I hope no report of any damage or injuries anywhere. As you've been informed that we have had several sightings, reportings of sightings of hot debris overhead, or not necessarily overhead, but visible. Some reports were up to 20 to 50 pieces. We've had no reports of any type of any damage, concern, or anything of that nature. We've had no contacts, to my knowledge at this time, from the Australian government through state channels.
Skylab's end, illustrated from modern...
Well, I don't know what you classify as a total success. We knew that we had a footprint of 4,000 miles in length. We knew we had very imprecise control. We knew there was no way we could assure that we could control it and put it in water. And I'd say that it came in parts of the world and on tracks that had the least people involved. From that standpoint, I think we were very fortunate. And although we didn't control the exact orbit area of that thing, I think the actions we took kept it in on orbits of very, very low population density. I was surprised that breakup took as long as it did to occur. The last hour or so prediction looked like it would not get to Australia.
But why did it take so long to break up, do you think?
Do not know.
Tougher satellite than you imagined?
Yeah, we built them good.
So, Skylab reached the end, not quite in the manner predicted, refusing to splash tamely out at sea, instead writing a fiery last page of its history in the night skies of Australia. Norman Rees, News at 10 in Washington.
The NASA said the remote town of Rolina say they've found Skylab's docking cylinder, one of several claims made after the spacecraft broke up and crashed to Earth in the middle of the Australian night. Eyewitnesses compared it to a fireworks display, with flashes of different colored lights, followed by a series of loud sonic booms. Near one town, 20 small pieces of charcoal-like wreckage were found. Like all other claims, they'll now be flown to Perth for scientific checking. Most of the debris seems to have landed in open country, populated largely by Aborigines, along with a few scattered sheep ranches. One ranch owner, Gordon Seiler, watched with his family as Skylab broke up.
Close to 1:45 or 12:45, the wife and I and the wife's mother woke up with loud bangs, which we thought instantly was an earthquake, and it shook the entire house. We could actually feel the concussion of them in the air. We ran outside, and only when we got outside we realised what it was, and realised it was the sonic booms of Skylab breaking up and going over. There was about 3 booms that were particularly loud, the loudest I've ever heard.
Keeping track of objects in orbit is an increasingly important surveillance task. Since the 1950s, more than 16 nations have placed satellites in orbit around the Earth. A prime function of the Aerospace Defense Command is to detect, track, and evaluate the mission of space platforms that could pose potential threat to the security of the United States. Large phased array radars such as Cobra Dane and PAVE-PAWS detect, identify, and track up to 200 objects simultaneously. Another satellite surveillance capability is the ground-based electro-optical deep space surveillance system. Special telescopes and motion picture cameras are used by the Air Defense Command in tracking satellites at long ranges. Advanced systems are being developed using telescopes and electro-optical systems. Satellites can be detected among the millions of stars that form the space background. For example, there's a satellite moving in this star field. It's difficult to find, even for a trained operator. Here it is. Using special techniques, the motion of the stars is frozen, and time is compressed. Now the star field looks like this. The moving satellite shows up clearly as the time compression is repeated. There are image enhancement techniques that can improve optical observation of spacecraft. Here, for example, is Skylab in orbit. The image is improved using image enhancement techniques.
The Soviets are actively engaged in the development and flight testing of an anti-satellite capability which could threaten the survivability of some of our space systems.
This situation raises the specter of space warfare as a new dimension of conflict. To protect our extensive space systems, we're deploying attack warning sensors on some of our satellites and making a major effort to bring together all space surveillance data. The underlying goal of the U.S. national space policy is that space must be preserved for peaceful use to the benefit of mankind. Air Force principles relating to space operations are totally consistent with this policy. With man's thirst for exploration, for knowledge and understanding, space is an infinite frontier. T.S. Eliot wrote,
"We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time."
Welcome to Adventure, the show where people truly push their lives to the limits. No talking heads here, just the real deals. I'm your host, Jim Clash. In 1973, astronaut Owen Garriott spent 60 days in orbit aboard the U.S. Skylab. Then, a decade later, 10 days in the U.S. Space Lab. Next year, Owen's son Richard plans to orbit the Earth too, but choosing instead to fly up in a Russian rocket. Richard, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for being here.
Owen, thanks for coming on.
Yes, sir.
I'm so excited to have two astronauts on at once, a father-son team. My first question to you, Owen, back in 1973 when you went up to Skylab, and this was right after, we had gone to the moon, the Cold War was still on, did you ever think that your son would be going into space with the Russians?
Richard was 12 years old at about that point, so I would never have guessed that. But of course, all of the ensuing things have built on that to make it a reasonable possibility and now a likelihood.
Well, how do you feel about the irony in it? I mean, isn't it?
I don't consider it ironical. I think that it's great. I think his background, his work and effort have already led him to where this is a very reasonable thing for him to do.
Now, Richard, I know you're on the board of Space Adventures, and you've been in line for a long time to do the suborbital space ride with them.
Yep.
Now you've committed to do the orbital one. $30 million?
Yep, $30 million. So it's, in fact, the price tag continues to climb, unfortunately.
Go back to when you were 12 years old and your father was up in Skylab. Tell me about that. Did that inspire you to want to go into space?
Well, of course it did. I mean, and what I think is different for me than the majority of Americans. I think there's, if you ask 80% of Americans in polls say they would love to go to space if the opportunity was available at a price they could afford. However, I think most people give up on that dream at a pretty young age. I, on the other hand, not only grew up with it seeming even more plausible and more normal, but everyone in the neighborhood I lived in was either a NASA astronaut or somebody related to the space program. So I grew up, believing it really could come true. And so all of, while my vocation is computer games, a lot of my personal investing has been in the privatization of space. And so I've been really working toward this goal for decades.
And now you've done some training, right, already? Have you done the zero G stuff and the MiG stuff and all that?
Exactly. So yeah, in the last 5 or 10 years, I've done a lot of that. I've actually done not only the zero G and MiGs to the edge of space as you have, but I've also even done the neutral buoyancy tank, where I've done a couple of EVA rehearsals. And in fact, this past year, as we've really been preparing for this specific flight, I've already been doing a lot of the medical pre-qualification that has to take place, and then the formal, what I'll call hard training.
One thing that we're all terrified of, and I'm a big pro space tourism guy, I want to go up someday, suborbital at least. We're just terrified of an accident involving civilians. It seems like everything's gotten so risk averse, the thinking in our country versus back in the Cold War. How are we going to handle it? Can we survive? There's going to be an accident, right?
I think that's quite true. And there has been accidents in the past. And the important thing, first of all, is to make sure that the people who are involved as participants understand that there are risks involved. And I'm sure that they do, because they talk about it in the same way we are right here. That they know there's a lot of advantage to be gained from the standpoint of knowledge and experience and so forth. And so they are willing to accept that risk, and they know what they're getting into. Whereas a person on the street does not have that background, does not know all of the work that goes into making sure that it's as safe as at all possible, all of the backup alternatives that are available in case of a problem. And the people involved do know about those things, and yet are still willing to take some reasonable amount of risk involved in their activity. So education is the important thing.
So you're going to go up. You know there's some risk involved. You're willing to accept that.
Yeah, and I similarly, I'm a very statistics-based analyst when it comes to risk-return analysis, I think with either space program, I'd be very happy to participate, but especially the Russian Soyuz program, for decades now has had an exceptional track record, and so I actually feel I don't think that I'll feel any real trepidation, even on launch day, associated with safety.
Having been to space yourself, what advice will you give him the day he goes up?
Not a lot of advice. He doesn't need really very much.
What will you say to him then?
I say, good luck. Hope you enjoy every moment of it, and we'll be waiting for your return to really build on all of the things that you have just accomplished.
Again, Owen and Richard Garriott. I'm Forbes adventurer Jim Clash. To read my column, pick up Forbes magazine or click on Forbes.com/adventurer. And thanks for watching the Forbes.com video network.
Bye, Richard. Bye.
Man, am I glad we finally got rid of that guy.
Man, I thought he'd never leave. Man, he was so annoying. Always tabula rasa this and computer games and man and Ultima. Man, I got sick of Ultima.
Okay, guys. It's nice. Good. Okay, we're ready for work. Okay. Okay.
Still trying to juggle, Greg, I see.
I wish Richard were still here. He really knew how to juggle in space.
And you know what? I wish he were here too, because he was really good at settling arguments. You're upside down.
No, you're upside down.
Obviously, you're upside down.
You're the one who's upside down.
No way! You're upside down.
Turn over. You're upside down.
Stop walking on the ceilings, man. It's freaking me out.
Stop telling me I'm upside down.
You're upside down.
You're upside down.
Hey guys, I check in oxygen. It's using more for crew.
Don't panic. Let's just think about what might be the obvious reason. Maybe it's aliens, interstellar aliens, trying to invade the space station as a prelude to invading Earth.
Or maybe one of us is the alien. And the only way we can find out is if we're like using up, they're breathing too much oxygen. I know what. We can build some weapons out of a rudimentary lathe.
I like that. Never give up.
Never surrender.
Hey guys, we have on visitors and on board. It's Sears and Station.
I don't know, Mike. We looked everywhere. Can't find anything. Can't find it.
Maybe it's invisible. Like that monster I saw, the id monster. Hey! It's Richard! Get him! Didn't we see you leave?
Oh, well, yeah, guys, but I was having such a great time up here that I just didn't want to go, so I used an inflatable version of myself to hypnotize the crew so you couldn't tell the difference.
Check. Oxygen still. Still goodbye. Richard.
You mean we got another stowaway?
Look! It's an alien!
I'm not an alien. I'm Richard's mother. I came up on the supply ship with a message for you folks. You've been on this space station long enough. The garbage is piling up. The lawns need to be mowed. You all have to go home right now if you know what's good for you.
Darn it. I'm a doctor, not a... Well, all right. But if we all leave, who's going to run the space station?
Hey, I did all my chores before I came up. Goodbye. Goodbye. Hey, don't worry, I'll take good care of her. Hey, Mom, when's dinner? I'm Richard Garriott. I'm probably best known for my work in the computer game field. If you go back to the beginnings, the roots, high school in the 1970s, which was right about the same time as personal computers came into existence, I was inspired by books like The Lord of the Rings and games like Dungeons and Dragons to take this new this new item, this personal computer, and started creating fantasy role-playing computer games. My first character that I began to play in role-playing games was known as British, because I happened to be born in Cambridge, England, and some of my first friends who I was playing with thought for some reason that I had a British accent, which I never did. I grew up in Houston, so I've never had a British accent. It was the owner of a computer store that saw this game that I was working on in the evenings and said, you know, Richard, that game is really much better than the few games that existed in the day, here on the store wall. Why don't we sell it? And so I went out and spent what I thought was a huge amount of money, $200 on Ziploc bags and Xerox cover sheets, and began to sell them on the pegboard. One of those found its way to California, and I was contacted by one of the first national distributors. They distributed about 30,000 copies. My royalties were $5 a unit. If you do that math, that's about $150,000 for a high school senior. And they were the ones who looked at it. They said, well, Richard Garriott's, fine name, it's your name, but Lord British is much more memorable. Why don't we just drop Richard Garriott and we'll leave Lord British on as the author? I've been Lord British for more than half my life now, so I actually feel strangely comfortable, adopting the persona of Lord British in the real world as much as in the virtual world. My first published game was called Skylab, which was really the prequel, effectively, to the series that I wrote for 25 years or more called Ultima. And published the first Ultima in about 1981, and in total produced 9 of the solo player Ultimas, plus a few spin-offs. Produced Ultima Online, the first what's now called massively multiplayer online game. Instead of playing by yourself on the computer, which is traditionally the way most computer games are played, in this case your computer is really just a terminal, a graphics terminal, connected through the internet to a big central server where everyone in the world who is playing the game can see each other, can play together, either cooperatively or against each other, in the same gigantic virtual worlds. So Tabula Rasa is the first non-Ultima game I've done in decades. Instead of fighting medieval monsters, players use wormholes to travel through a variety of planets in space and fight against the evil alien horde that has invaded the Earth and wiped out our homeland. As part of the what I'll call promotional event for the launch of Tabula Rasa, we tried to create what you might call a reality bridge and try to prove the truth of some of what you might call the magical or superpower aspects of Tabula Rasa. So I hired a whole slew of magicians who could come in and do things like spoon bending or other have mental powers to physically affect telekinetically the world in which we live, to showcase how here in Austin, here at my home, we actually were discovering and uncovering some of these powers that ultimately would be similar to what showed up in the game. We then bussed everybody over to the property where I'm building my new home, where as we were digging the foundations of the new home, some of these artifacts were uncovered. And then we set up a big event there. We had a huge pyrotechnics show that included not only lights and sound, but also explosions and gunfire. But my brother happens to be a helicopter pilot, so we actually had him come in and swoop in with helicopters with lights, and had police cars and the whole Men in Black kind of confrontation between the aliens and the human defenses. So I'm a big believer in the quote that I believe Arthur C. Clarke coined, that any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And as you may know, right beside us actually is one of these devices. So this is a very special material known as ferrous fluid. And it's basically is oil impregnated with iron filings, or rust, really, iron oxide. So it's not sharp in the sense of you can't injure yourself on it, but it is sharp in the sense of it is coming up to a perfect point. In this table I've built a collection of electromagnets that if you power on these electromagnets will create magnetic fields that will come up through the soil, and then this ferrous fluid will try to form along those magnetic field lines and create three-dimensional shapes rising up out of a liquid.
I enjoy, exploring the real world just as much as I enjoy exploring the virtual world. And creatively, I enjoy creating virtual worlds just as much as I enjoy creating physical, practical things like my unusual homes or other big interactive themed events that are physical. Virtual exploration is really only one piece of the puzzle of the richness of the tapestry of life. And so I think it will remain a very popular portion. So I think, but I don't think there's any chance really of people tuning out of the real world and locking in permanently into their virtual existence.
Welcome to my home. I actually call this Britannia Manor, and right as you come into the interior of the house, you'll begin to see there's already some unusual features, swords and crossbows here. We then built this steel structure upon which is mounted the telescope that's in my observatory. This is actually the highest point in the entire city of Austin. I actually got a topographical map out, and that's how I selected this property. That's how I selected this property, was actually to identify the best place to put a telescope to get a nice 360-degree view of the horizon, which we get up here in the observatory dome. The homes I build are very much manifestations of the same creative drive that you see that goes into the games and other events that I produce. They function as a normal house, but they're also big, what you might call personal playscapes. So they're filled with secret passageways throughout, and an observatory, and dungeons, and indoor-outdoor pools, and artificial rain, and then of course all my collections of collections. That's a habit I picked up from my mother, actually, I think, is to be be this level of pack rat, you might say. This is my home office, where I keep a lot of my recent artifacts from my space trip, including these are some of the items I took with me to space and back. So now we'll go down to what I often call the medieval portion of the house. And I've got some nice astronomy prints, and you also begin to see some of the more unusual bits of art in the house. These are actually preserved octopus tentacles that are here in these containers. And then in here in the upper floor of what you might call the study, a collection from my childhood, so to speak. I'm obviously a big fan of The Lord of the Rings. I've got not only first editions, but those are first editions. These are pre-first editions, pre-publication editions, proof copies. So here on the upper floor of the study, one of the common questions is, how do we get downstairs? Because of course there's no obvious route between the two. There's no staircases or doorways. And the solution to that involves this surface. And in this surface, I've inserted 18 magnetic sensors. And in fact, there's a drop panel on this side with 9, and there's actually 9 more that I don't generally use on this side. And in this the kind of eyeballs and teeth thing that my mother made for me, I've inserted magnets up inside of it. And so now if you move this device in the right pattern over those magnetic sensors, that little click has unlatched a magnetic latch that lets us into this secret passageway. We can go down the spiral staircase here to the lower floor of the study, to the dungeon. And the dungeon, of course, is the room full of dead things, some recently, some long dead, as well as a few pieces of art. This is a velociraptor skeleton that's actually a cast, and this is also a piece of art. But most of the other things in here are real, including my dead friend that I call Pedro. This is the skull of an African elephant. Across here on this side of the room, these are authentic South American shrunken heads. I have a number of vampire hunting kits. Everything from like a human fetus that I have here in this jar to a human heart. These are Borneo headhunter human trophy skulls, and the skulls of everything from African lions and prehistoric cave bears, creatures and critters from around the globe. In the living room, of course, we have the normal things, couches, chairs, stereos, and TVs, but we also have something unusual in my house, which of course is the continuation of the secret passageway network. And so if I reach in this drawer and reach up into the ceiling, I'm actually pulling a little latch. And then if you come over here and you look at this innocent looking mirror, this is really a secret passageway entrance. This is actually one of 2 Sputniks that I own. So this is the first one that I own, and the other one's up in the automaton room that I'll take you to momentarily. I'm sure that this is the largest collection of contemporary automatons. And I think of these as, if you think about if you programmed on a computer before, the CPU in a computer is actually quite simple. It can load and store and add and subtract and not much else. And so it's a very simple, what I'll call, set of gears and levers. And the thing I really enjoy about automatons is that it's really basically a fairly simple set of gears and levers, but physically assembled to create something really masterful artistically. And so I find these to be a good, what I'll call, physical analogy to what we do virtually. And I think that's why I really appreciate these things. There's another fun one here too, actually. This guy's pretty good too. Naturalist catching butterflies and alien catching him. This one actually requires looking in this little hole. So this one is the American execution. We electrocute our victims. And so here's this guy being prepared for the electric chair. The doctors are checking him out. They're checking the voltages of the machine. They lower it down, the thing on his head, turning glowing red while he's being electrocuted. And he's killed. He's playing music only the dead can hear, so that's why you can't hear it. And even outside, there's fun things, like I've got a pond with a bridge and little cabanas and things out on it. I've got a 3-horse carousel that operates out in the front yard. Literally throughout my entire professional career, I've been investing in the privatization of space, helping to unlock the gates of private space travel. I fancy myself, a gentleman explorer, you might say. On October 12th, I launched to the International Space Station, and I went there on board a Russian Soyuz rocket, actually called Soyuz TMA-13. That's a pretty spectacular day, you might say. I'd already spent about 9 months in Russia training. In the long-term future of the Earth, there's no question that something apocalyptic will occur. We someday will probably be struck by an asteroid that will destroy most of life on the Earth. It's just only a question of when. We may unleash nuclear holocaust, maybe. I think it's unlikely today, but we've been through cycles where it seemed more likely, so it might happen again. Biological problems that are pandemics that can come up, I think, are also a practical risk. And so if you add all that up, one of the best ways for humanity to ensure that we survive into the future is to make sure we have isolated settlements, around the universe, in which case an apocalypse on one won't wipe out the whole species. I very much agree with that. That's one very compelling reason that humanity really does need to spread beyond the surface of the Earth. The only debate in my mind is, how urgently should you feel that that's necessary? And I personally believe that there's no time like the present, so let's get to work. Walking up to a fully fueled rocket, which has kerosene and liquid oxygen, so it's frozen to well below freezing. So it's the whole vehicle is covered with frost, and any air coming near it is turning into fog and streaming down the sides of this rocket. You squeeze yourself in, and on a Soyuz you literally squeeze yourself in through the hatches and get down into your seat. And one of my jobs is to push the button that starts up the operation of the vehicle.
Then when the countdown reaches 0, the thing lights up, and it's funny. It's a relatively gentle ride into space. I mean, the G-forces start very minimal, but slowly and steadily increase to about 4.5 Gs. And after about 8 minutes at 4.5 Gs, the engine's cut off and you're in space. Before I flew, you always hear about things that people have said, like once you go to space and you see the Earth from such a distance and you see the world without the boundaries between countries and things, how it changes your perception of life and humanity's place on Earth. It's pretty amazing to look out at the edge of the Earth and see the thin veil of the atmosphere clinging to the very round Earth that you can see from space. And so you feel still very intimate with the surface of the Earth in ways that I found unexpected. The next thing you begin to notice is how every fertile place on the Earth that you travel over is now fully occupied by people. There is no place that you might describe as easy to occupy that isn't already occupied. While there was no one moment where I'd say, aha, I've had an epiphany, I now have a changed perception of humanity and Earth, it really is something that builds on you over time, but really is truly there. So upon my return, I can definitely now reflect on it and say that absolutely, I believe that my perception of what I call the fragility of the Earth and the human footprint on the Earth is actually absolutely changed. My father is an astronaut, so I grew up in a household where space felt very normal. And in fact, not only was my father an astronaut, but my right-hand next-door neighbor was a guy named Joe Engle, another astronaut. My left-hand next-door neighbor was Hoot Gibson, another astronaut. So everyone in my neighborhood was involved in some way in putting people into space. And so I kind of grew up believing everybody would go to space. And when I was a young teenager, I was actually at NASA one time, and one of the NASA flight physicians was giving me an eye test, and my eyesight was fairly poor when I was young. And they said, oh, I'm so sorry, Richard, but your poor eyesight's going to prevent you from ever being selected as a NASA astronaut. And for me, that was like being told, hey, by the way, you are no longer eligible for the club that everyone you know is a member of. Prior to that moment, I don't think I was particularly devoted to getting my way into space, until I was told, you can't go. I spent 2 days living on board the Soyuz while we were catching up to and matching orbits to dock with the ISS. I then spent 10 days on board the space station doing a wide variety of experiments.
Yeah, I would definitely say that this has met and in many ways exceeded my expectations. There's no question that I've already begun to think about the next trip up.
How have you found your zero-G artwork to be going?
Well, I did create the zero-G artwork. I came up with a glove box in which I could release some paint without risking painting the walls of the station, and created some art that I'll be bringing back so you can judge for yourself. With this trip, I was trying to study and analyze how private citizens might be able to contribute to the success here in space, and I'll have a lot more thoughts for that when I come back down. Thanks.
Station, this is KSCPAO. That's the final question here from Florida. We're now going to toss you briefly back to Houston for a few additional.
We would take that squirrel that we made and make a gray squirrel variation. That would be
make an evil rabbit squirrel.
Yeah, it would just look.
Oh,
I mean, you actually are kind of looking like a rabbit squirrel with your mustache right now. So.
And that fits in with my Illuminati plans. And so,
yeah,
every time we make something new, we want to make sure that it shows up in the game as an asset. So every costume we make needed to be for avatars. Every creature we make. Like my Illuminati from Times Square thing there? Is that what you're shaking?
That's good.
That was actually
Photoshop, by the way.
Not for me, but my wife Letitia was invited to help close the bell at the NASDAQ, so I got to go along, and I did the in-game Illuminati symbol, which was then broadcast out into Times Square. The photographers thought that was something different and weird that somebody was doing and they didn't know why. So there is the Illuminati emote from our game that only developers currently have. In any case, broadcasts across the globe.
Coming soon to conspiracy websites across the nation.
This is an interesting one, Richard, which will...
Hi, this is Richard Garriott. I'm the 6th private citizen who ever flew in space on a trip arranged by Space Adventures. But I'm here today because I'm a judge on the new Skylab project, where any student age 14 to 18 can submit an entry, and if your experiment is selected, it will not only fly to the International Space Station, but then be performed by a NASA astronaut. Now, this is an honor that many professionals spend their entire career in pursuit of. So this is a truly fantastic opportunity open to any student age 14 to 18. I sure hope you enter.
YouTube Skylab is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you to have your experiment performed by astronauts like me in the space station.
Hello, my name is Amr.
And I'm talking to you from Spain.
India.
From Jamaica.
And I'm 16 years old. Please vote for me.
Getting to meet everybody else from around the world, all coming together in the pursuit of science, and just, it doesn't matter what language we speak or where we're from, we just all came together because we all like space. That's just really mind-blowing. It's great.
I'd like to just tell you which two science experiments will be there. They're the ones from Dorothy and Sarah, and the ones from
Meeting the kids today was totally inspirational. Their faces are going to flash in my mind as soon as I open the experiment, so it's awesome.
What we wanted to find out was, because the salmonella becomes more bad in space, more virulent, we thought, if that could happen, why not make the good bacteria more good?
My experiment is designed to investigate the effect of microgravity on the way the jumping spider catches its prey.
I'm very grateful to be here in Star City and try all the cosmonaut activities. It definitely has changed me.
The winning experiments are scheduled to be launched from Tanegashima in southern Japan.
This is the closest that we're ever going to be able to go and see a rocket launch, and I've always wanted to see one ever since I was a little kid. Dreams really do come true.
I've always been fascinated by science because with a handful of equations I can explain the world around me.
Our experiment is actually going into space, and we were just brainstorming it in a little classroom in Troy, Michigan, and now it's actually going on the ISS.
Hello there, and welcome to YouTube Skylab Live. I'm Bill Nye, the science guy, broadcasting live from right here on Earth in the Google Creator Space in London.
YouTube Skylab, this is Houston.
Do you hear us?
Loud and here on the International Space Station.
That's
How
great.
you doing? I have them here in space. This is a gap. This is Dorothy and Sarah's. Thanks to everybody who participated. You guys all made the contest awesome. We're just honored to have been part of it, so thank you.
Humanity's future relies on moving beyond Earth. Realizing this goal will require an entrepreneurial spirit and a new generation of scientists and astronauts.